but he doesn't really brush his teeth all that well. I'm really surprised his teeth look as good as they do. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych podcast, the podcast where psychology meets film. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and in this episode, we are going to visit some more Hitchcock, but not in the way that you think. We're actually going to do it in a parody, satire kind of way. We're talking Mel Brooks's High Anxiety, his 1977 wonderful comedy that pays so much homage to the wonderful Hitchcock tradition that Hitchcock himself told Mel that he loved it. So, what is this movie? If you haven't seen it, it's probably because it's not one of his higher tier ones like Spaceballs, History of the World Part 1, Young Frankenstein, etc., right? It's one of his lower tier ones, I would say. But this particular movie starts Mel as a main character actor in his movies as opposed to either not in it or as a side character. He obviously wrote and directed as well as starred. Other writers on this film include Ron Clark and Rudy DeLuca. Rudy DeLuca himself plays a wonderful character named Braces because he has braces, and there is an amazing shot which I laugh out loud at every time because it's so excessive, because Hitchcock loved his close-ups of the braces, right? There's a wonderful shot of Rudy DeLuca just like grinning from ear to ear, and the camera just pulls in to his mouth and a full mouth full of braces. It's amazing. Mel Brooks stars as Dr. Richard H. Thorndike. We'll get into some ideas about his name when we get into it with our guest. Madeline Kahn plays Victoria Brisbane, or Brisbane, as an American would say, I suppose, in a lovely role as the Hitchcock blonde. More on that as well. Cloris Leachman plays Nurse Charlotte Diesel, doing what I can only imagine was somebody trying to talk with something like in the back of their mouth, holding it with their teeth. An amazing character and a lovely pairing with Harvey Korman, a wonderful actor, and so sad he's no longer with us. Dr. Charles Montague. Ron Carey plays the chauffeur and fledgling photographer slash sidekick, as he calls himself when he introduces himself to Thorndike, Brophy. What a name. What a name, by the way, Brophy. Howard Morris plays a Freud-coded German psychiatrist named Professor Lilleman. And it's funny because he's small, and so he looks like a little man. Lilleman, kind of as it rolls off the tongue, it feels like that way. Dick Van Patten plays another doctor at the Institute. More on that in a second. Dr. Philip Wentworth. Jack Riley plays desk clerk. Charlie Callis, Ron Clark, Rudy DeLuca. Barry Levinson, the director, has a role as Dennis the bellboy in a great homage scene from Psycho. Lee Delano, Richard Stahl, Daryl Zwirling, Murphy Doone. So many wonderful people in this film. The basic plot is that Richard Thorndike is a world-renowned psychiatrist, is invited to become the new director to the Psychoneurotic Institute for the very, very, it's underlined, nervous, where he's replacing Dr. Ashley, who died mysteriously, although Brophy suspects foul play, right? So he goes to this institute. We meet a number of doctors, I already mentioned, and nurses. Of course, I mentioned Dr. Montague, Harvey Korman, Nurse Diesel, played by Cloris Leachman. And he then also meets several patients. One who thinks he's a Cocker Spaniel, whom they call Arthur Brisbane. This is very important. The second half of the movie, or maybe the second act and the third act, so 2/3 of the film, take place in San Francisco because Thorndike is also invited to what I can only imagine is an APA, but not the American Psychological Association, but the American Psychiatric Association, the folks who write the DSM. They just call it a psychiatric convention, but I think it's the convention of the American Psychiatric Association. Whether or not they have one, I don't know. I know the American Psychological Association has one every year, but maybe I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't know. But it's being held in San Francisco, and just like Vertigo, San Francisco is a main character. And through the movement of the plot, there's a murder, there's a frame for the murder, there's a reason for the frame of the murder, and we know all of these things are happening in real time. And so there is a specter of a mystery like you would have in a Hitchcock movie, but there's not actually any mystery. It's like it's all laid out for you as clearly as possible, which is quite funny. And the film ends with a very important revelation, which then turns into a great resolution, and Mel Brooks and Madeline Kahn get married. Well, the characters do, I guess. Now, where's the title of this movie come from? Well, the malady that affects Thorndike is acrophobia, which is referred to as high anxiety in the movie by the characters in the movie. Like, this is the name of the acrophobia in there. And it's meant to be a play on Scotty Ferguson's Vertigo in Vertigo. So there you go. High anxiety. He has a fear of heights. Lots of things lead him to be in situations where he is in high places, and he has panic attacks and all of this stuff. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. So as we go through this, we're going to pinpoint all of the things that have been, or at least the big things that we identified are homages to, direct homages or even subtle ones to the Hitchcock of it all, right? And then we'll talk a little bit about Freud, because, of course, as you might have guessed, recently on this show, we've talked a lot about Hitchcock and his love for Freud and how Freud appears in his movies. Well, of course, Mel Brooks was also someone who sought therapy through psychoanalysis and said it really helped him, especially with the anxiety of making it big time in Hollywood. So we're going to jump into the Freud of it all, because not only are the homages to Hitchcock Freud, there's also some lovingness toward Freud directly in this. And what I mean by lovingness, I mean absolute satirical ridicule. So let's go up to the 17th floor and look on down as we discuss high anxiety. My guest host today is Dr. Ed Hansen. Ed is a frequent guest on the show. He was last on talking The Holdovers back in episode 90 at the end of 2024. Ed is one of the specialized teaching faculty members in Florida State University's Psych department, where he teaches a variety of courses, including IO, that's Industrial Organizational for the uninitiated, Research Methods, Psych of Personality, and Social Psych. Ed, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks so much, Alex. I know that was, our Christmas episode 2 years ago. That was a fun one.
Yeah, a year and a half ago.
But it's great to be back.
Excellent. Well, I'm happy to have you back because we've been talking about doing another episode for a while and just finding the sweet spot, right one. And with my recent run of Hitchcock films, I think we could go back to when I had Brooke Cannon on sort of in the beginning of the fall of 2025 through the beginning of the 2026 calendar year. It's been a lot of Hitchcock. And so I was like, ooh, there's one.
Well, yeah, I remember when you did the first Jane Hallinan episode on Rear Window.
Oh, yes, and that one as well. Yeah, exactly. So, before we jump into all things high anxiety, how have you been?
A complicated question for me,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
This has been a very challenging personal year. I'm going to spare your listeners the details,
That's
but
fair.
I've been on leave since August due to a family medical situation.
Mhm.
The good news is that that is now mostly behind us, minus a few check-ins and scans and just monitoring situations. But
Mhm.
very excited to be going back to work in May. So by the time your listeners get this episode, I'll
Yep.
be back in the classroom, which is a wonderful place to be.
Excellent, and I'm happy to hear that the things that have been going on are on the up and up. That's awesome to hear. So this May teaching, what are you going to be doing?
Oh, I'm going to be teaching IO again, which is nice. That was the course that I was teaching in summer 2025 when we got the medical news, and I'll just jump right back into another summer course of that. It's a 6-week course.
6 weeks, okay.
And then the second half of the summer, I'll be doing another 6-week course, but I'll be doing child psychology.
Okay, all right.
Is even though it's not my area, I've been teaching that since grad school, and it's kind of been fun seeing the progression from teaching it before having children to after having children.
Okay, yep.
And yeah, that's always a fun one as well. Students really connect with that one. That's almost cheating because it's just you can get away with showing baby
our
videos
students
and
love
like
the developmental sequence. Absolutely. Not only do they love the instructor, my teaching partner, but they love the material. So yeah, 100% right there with you. I have no desire to teach day after day about children. Nope. I don't have any inclination to do so. It's weird.
No, that's okay. As long as you like your own.
Yeah.
That's good.
I suppose. So 6 weeks, pretty intensive.
Yep. Yeah, it's gonna, depending on how many hours you meet for, they have models where it's 3 or 4 or 5 days a week.
Okay.
I think the 3-hour ones are like 3 2-hour 10-minute classes. Not my preference, but I think that it's a good way for students to sort of dip their toes in it. You do feel like you're racing a little bit, so I try to keep that in mind, expectations on what I ask them to do. But yeah, I mean, honestly, the classes are smaller. They're more like the size classes that you have at your school. So,
probably, yeah.
Especially because I have my schedule set up so I teach at 8 a.m. in the summer, so I can get home and spend a lot of the day with the boys.
Right.
Which is very nice, but that keeps my class sizes nice and tidy.
Yeah. 8 a.m. But I would imagine 8 a.m. in the Tallahassee summertime, even May. I mean, it's not technically summer. Yeah, I get it. But, you're talking about Gulf region right there. And so 8 a.m. is probably also...
I do not have to walk on campus at 1 in the afternoon.
Exactly. That's my point. That's my point. Yep. Because you'll be drenched by the time you get back to your
car,
right?
I still have to exist.
Yes.
It's no picnic. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. Thanks very much. I'm excited that you're heading back to the classroom after a year.
Me too. Yeah. I was talking to some colleagues and stuff this week, starting to feel real that I'm going back. So
yeah, excellent. When does the summer session, this first summer session, start?
Yeah, second week of May. So day after Mother's Day will be my first day back in the classroom.
All right, perfect timing.
But of course, I'll have a little bit of work leading up to it at that point. But yeah,
you gotta do this whole prep thing again. Ooh, wow.
I know. To be honest, I told you this the other day. A little concerned that my teaching brain muscle is not as exercised as it normally is, and I don't always make the snappy connections quite as snappily. And
that's true. But as you know, it's just like riding a bike.
Yeah, but we're also middle-aged. And so
don't bring that in there. Don't bring that in here.
It takes a little longer to recover.
It takes a little bit longer to pedal that bike as well. Those knees aren't as good as they used to be. Right. Speaking of, let's talk about high anxiety, right? Which is something that just keeps growing as you get older.
Yeah. It's a fear that I'll be honest, it's probably the biggest phobia I've ever had in my life is like acrophobia, fear of heights, fear of falling.
Interesting. Okay. I grew out of my acrophobia. When I was a kid, I had like severe acrophobia. I would not go near the edges of things like that I knew were high up. So yeah, I feel you on that one, but it's no longer an issue anymore.
That's nice.
I think I extinguished it a little bit when I finally went on roller coasters, because I wouldn't go on roller coasters. I was just like, absolutely not. No.
See, that's the thing though. When I'm strapped into a roller coaster, I have no fear of falling. It's like I don't mind being up high. It's falling to my death. That
Okay.
is
It's
the
a very
scary.
specific form of acrophobia, I would imagine.
So like for example, driving over a bridge, do you have intrusive thoughts about dying because of a sneeze? I do.
Listen, I do, but it's actually just anywhere on the road, because I have this
Okay.
condition
I
that
suppose that's true. That actually gives me peace.
I have this condition that causes syncope, so like fainting behavior, tunnel vision, if I get into a coughing fit. And so whenever I have a cold that leads to a cough, like so going from upper respiratory to lower respiratory, I'm just like, oh man, every time I'm driving to and from work, which is a 25-minute, 18-mile drive,
Sure.
I'm just like, let's not have a coughing fit right now.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I hear you. But it's not specifically driving off the bridge down into either a gorge or a body of water or anything like that.
Or if I'm in a skyscraper, I imagine the window bursting out.
You watch too many movies, Ed, I think is...
Yeah, except for the fact that while I lived outside of Chicago, I thought, oh yeah, that's crazy. And then literally a couple weeks later, after I was in a storm at my friend's high rise, I saw pictures of these windows that had just burst during a thunderstorm.
So, I mean, you had your Final Destination vision there. You were Devon Sawa.
We're tapping into some things that we haven't covered in any of our previous episodes.
I don't think so. Yeah, no. It's a great therapy session for both of us, I think. And so I think that bleeds into this movie. So before we talk about like the psych of it, the homages to Hitchcock and all of that stuff, what did you think of the movie itself?
I think it's a pretty good movie. I think that it's definitely made me laugh a lot. I think it's fair to say that we're discussing this movie more because of our love for Mel Brooks than for the Freudian psychoanalysis themes or even psychological themes in Hitchcock films that he's satirizing. Mel is the only director where I'm confident I've watched all of his feature films.
All 11.
My favorite film of all time is Young Frankenstein, which to your credit, you did float as an idea for this podcast.
Sure.
That was my first. To our friends Nick and Danny on their In Love with Movies podcast. And my background in neuroscience is not as strong. Whereas High Anxiety, on the other hand, really fits because, as you said, you've got 3 episodes already on Hitchcock movies.
4.
And so 4, excuse me. And so if a person was going to create a psychology of Hitchcock film course, I hope they would consider including this comedic tribute in their songs. I think it would be appropriate.
Brooke Cannon, if you are watching, please include this movie in your Hitchcock course because she does teach one. Yeah,
please do that. I would be delighted. It's not, even though it's not in Mel's elite tier, the producers, Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, I would say it's very comparable to a movie like Spaceballs. Whereas if people love Star Wars, they will appreciate Spaceballs more than most.
Right.
And to a Hitchcock fan, they're going to have probably a pretty darn good time, unless they take themselves too seriously.
Yeah.
But, actually Mel respected Hitchcock so much, he considers him one of, if not the best filmmakers ever. And so before making this film, he reached out to him and they became friends, meeting every Friday, exchanging notes on the movie. And in the end, Hitchcock said, have no anxiety about High Anxiety. He was a big fan of the picture.
Yep.
So if it's good enough for him, it has to be good enough for me.
And I read, so there isn't a lot of trivia on IMDb for a film that's this old. I was very surprised that it was only like a handful. But one of the trivia that I really enjoyed reading about their relationship was a note that Hitchcock gave to Mel. And he suggested, so I imagine that Mel gave him like an early screen of this. Like it wasn't a full final theatrical cut yet, but he gave him an early idea of it. And then so Hitchcock said to him, what would be a great thing to do would be to have your protagonist, in this case Dr. Thorndike, jump on to a boat in San Francisco Harbor.
Right, he's being chased.
And he's being chased, right? So jump onto a boat.
Yeah.
But because this is parody and slapstick, the boat is actually coming into dock.
Yeah.
And so there would be the momentary like, oh crap. And unfortunately that doesn't make it into the movie because they weren't able to get the funding for it. It was going to be an expensive thing, right? Something on San Francisco docks, which are obviously constantly busy,
right?
And being able to, provide the stunt work and film crew and all of that. So he really enjoyed it, Hitchcock. He really enjoyed it. He watched the final cut and he thought it was phenomenal.
Oh, yeah. After watching the film, he gave Mel, who is like, a wine enthusiast, like these Magnum bottles of
yes.
1961 rare vintage and everything. So he was quite touched, I think.
Yeah. I mean, who wouldn't be touched when you are doing a send-up? And what better way to do a send-up than a parody that isn't mean or malicious in any way?
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like when people get a Weird Al song parody. Mm-hmm. It's this sense of like, oh, I've made it.
Yeah.
And I think that even more so in this case, because, Mel did Western parody. He did a horror parody. Mm-hmm. He did silent movies. And then since Hitchcock, he is a genre unto himself.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's not a satire or spoof of like suspense movies. Mm-mm. It's his Hitchcockian style.
Yeah.
What an ultimate compliment.
Ultimate compliment on a single filmmaker and that single filmmaker's proclivities, right? Autistic. Autistic. I don't know. His auteur proclivities as that prototypical director, I guess, of 20th century cinema.
Yeah, I think that, it was almost to the point before you did any of those Hitchcock films, it was like a massive hole in your library.
Yeah, I agree.
That has since been addressed a few times over.
Yes, and I have had some ideas of doing a solo episode essay that I've been kind of, when I do a solo episode, I've kind of made them into these essays now on North by Northwest, so I could keep adding to it. And of course, there's Spellbound, there's Rebecca, and all of these other ones that most definitely fit on this show, and they will be eventually. Like they're percolating, right? They're going to be here for a while. So let's jump into the psych of the, not necessarily the underlying themes or anything like that, but there are a lot of things in this movie, and as you said, sometimes you got to have a little fun on the show. On this show. Not every movie needs to be a groundbreaking conversation of dissecting a film for all of its psych. And, it's very surface level stuff that we're going to focus on here. But there is a great scene in the middle of the movie where, like, psychology as it was understood in the 1970s versus even how psychology is understood in the 2020s.
You're talking about his speech at the conference?
His speech at the conference, yeah. So I kind of want to start there and then just branch out into some of the other stuff.
To be a Mel Brooksian fan to even like work that into your course. I think that clip, and for the listeners, he is, one of the best psychiatrists in the country.
Mm-hmm. World.
Oh, the world. He won the Nobel Prize after all.
Yes, after all. Yeah, exactly.
And so, everyone is sort of sitting there just hanging on his every word.
Yeah, bated breath.
And he says, Dr. Thorndike, you have criticized the Freudian idea of penis envy.
Yep.
Can you expand on that? And he was happy to, except for one problem. And I don't know if you've ever had a student that asked to bring a young child to class.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
You gotta be careful with some of our psychology topics. And Dr. Thorndike was right in the middle of talking about such a sensitive topic, controversial topic that is all about erogenous zones and all of these different things. And a couple of young girls are brought in by their father who couldn't get a babysitter.
And he was late.
Oh, yeah.
So he arrives at the end of the speech, and now we're in the question and answer period, and that's when the question is asked about the penis envy criticism. And so I think very few people can do this well. And maybe it's just my bias toward Mel Brooks as an actor with a great sense of comedic timing.
You really need it because, I mean, he has always been a very well-read guy.
Yeah.
He always is, he'll go lowbrow for sure, but he will also bring in references to actual papers written by psychoanalysts or Russian literature. A lot of jokes that I'm never going to get watching his films, but he does them for himself or other people who are in the know.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is one of those cases where actually he might have been reading like, oh yeah, the psychosexual stages of development have fallen out of favor.
Yeah.
That modern psychologists don't think penis envy is a big deal. That it's not all about sexual repression and it's not all about the Oedipus complex and all of these kinds of things. So even though, interestingly, Mel and Alfred Hitchcock both were, at various levels into psychoanalysis or Freudian theory,
right?
He was also probably reading like, oh, this isn't the main thing anymore. So he's talking about, he actually uses the word validity in his speech.
Yes, he does. Yeah, he thinks it's antiquated. He thinks it lacks validity, and he uses that term straight and narrow. And the crowd is scoffs at this, especially the question asker. Like, are you sure? And then the comedic aspect of it, and like I said, I think that Mel Brooks is the only one to be able to do this. He's trying to think of other words to say that would be more appropriate for these two girls. And he comes up with pee-pee.
Yeah.
Which I think is so funny because that is the term that pretty much every single parent would use in that circumstance. Every single one. And it just came so quick to him. And then, there was a question about fascination with breasts. And he starts to use the word, but he makes the hand gestures. And then he looks down and he goes, balloons.
And, it's funny, like on a slightly more serious note in this silly scene, he also acknowledges how women didn't really have a voice in the psychological field up to this point. I don't know if you caught it, but there were the 5 influential psychologist pictures on the back wall.
Yes.
And it was Freud and Jung, and one of them was Dr. Joyce Brothers, who he would do like interviews with on the Tonight Show.
Right. But so that was a great like previous career gag, right?
Yeah. And so
little psych gag, yeah.
To a room of all white men says women have not had a voice. So the only women in the room are these young girls.
Right. And, even with the way that his answer progresses and then he's getting asked and stuff, he recognizes that the masculinity of the theory, right? The maleness of the theory is he's trying to reframe sexual trauma, right? Because I think by the 1970s, these Freudian ideas were pretty losing steam, right? They were out of touch. Feminist movements were starting to take hold, and gender studies at universities were growing. And I would say that even modern psychology was at an inflection point in the 1970s as well.
Well, it's interesting when you made the note about the validity of penis envy or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
It dawned on me. I've seen this film a couple times, and I always just thought that, he chose the name Richard Thorndike because it sounded like Roger Thornhill from North by Northwest. There's a lot of parallels of the plot, mistaken identity, and murder, all those things.
Yeah, that's one of the homages. Yep. For
what do you
North by
think
Northwest.
If he was actually maybe doing an homage to behaviorist Edward Thorndike?
That's where my mind went. So when I saw your note about this, I was like, yeah, I was thinking about writing something like that because I'm teaching learning this semester. So it's been a while since I talked about Thorndike because of the way the course has progressed. But yeah, that's where my thinking went, right? And as you note, Thorndike is a predecessor in the operant conditioning realm to Skinner.
Yeah, who everybody knows B.F. Skinner. Everybody knows the Skinner box, his pigeons, his rats, etc. But, it was these contributions to educational psychology, which really then Skinner took a hold of. And then, the behaviorist movement really started to take hold because it's funny, when I told my dad I was changing majors to psychology, he had been in college in the late 60s, early 70s. And you know what he said to me? He's like, oh, that's awesome, son. I love animal behavior.
I love it.
And it's because I later found out his intro psych book was written by B.F. Skinner.
Yeah. He was. I talked to some now retired faculty. That's just the way the cookie crumbles, right? About how their intro psych experience was Skinnerian through and through.
Yeah. So I think that the name Thorndike, I no longer think it's just a slight variation of Thornhill. I think it was a mindful choice that he wanted to say, like, no, I'm at the cutting edge, moving away from Freudian analysis, even though his advisor, you say, is very much like Freud coded.
Oh yes, as soon as I saw
Dr. Oldman,
because it's Lolliman, and the funny thing about it is the way that everyone says it sounds like Little Man, and he's the shortest character.
Yeah,
he's the shortest character, but because he's vaguely German, Austrian, and the way that he says his words makes me think Austrian rather than German, just by the subtle differences in the accent. I'm just like, he has to be Viennese, just like Freud.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it. I haven't gotten that deep into Duolingo to be able to differentiate between Austrian and German.
I don't know. It's just the way that they say certain things.
No,
it's just like somebody was like, okay, we got to have a Freud character in this.
Yeah. Well, I think it would be fascinating to know what kind of notes that were like in support of and or sort of criticizing Freudian psychoanalysis between Alfred Hitchcock and Mel Brooks in those Friday meetings.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be fascinating to be a fly on that wall? Because a lot of your episodes have pointed out, like, through symbolism that was sometimes more obvious, sometimes less obvious,
right,
that there were a lot of allusions to Freudian psychoanalysis. And then you look at the homage and spoof of his whole film catalog, and it's directly related to psychiatry and psychoanalysis.
Yeah, I just want to add to this before we talk about some of the other homages here. One of the other questions that was asked was about potty training in this Q&A, right? So it shifts from sexual trauma in young childhood, and potty training is an example that is being used to reference sexual trauma, which had been I don't think it's much anymore, but had been a hallmark of psychoanalysis and psychodynamic theory for a long time. And instead of talking about, I don't know, urinating and defecating, which are clinical, technical terms for potty training or actions you do while on the toilet, because those two little girls are there, and I would say they were probably about 11 or 12, something around there. They didn't look like teenagers, but they also didn't look like they were 7. Right. And so the wordplay is amazing. He's like, how about we call them number 1 and cockadoodie? It's just
and the person in the audience isn't phased at all. He says, well, let's say for the sake of argument, cocky-doodie.
Yes, it's the manner in which the conversation continues and everyone is on board with it. It's just amazing, right? And just the final wordplay in this, the sex was called woo-woo. Or no, the vagina was called woo-woo. Yeah. So, it's just amazing, right? There's the Freud of it all, and I think there's enough there to go into depth. But I think I want to take the next part of this and just talk about the loving homages to the other things, and they still do have psychology associated with. So let's take a look at the homages to Vertigo, right? So to remind listeners, just in case you haven't listened to that episode that I did with a film studies professor, we talked about Vertigo, and we talked about how Freud really influenced Hitchcock to make an obsession style film. And my guest in that episode specifically suggested that Scotty Ferguson, played by James Stewart, is obsessed with his mother. People all through the decades have dissected this, and obsession is definitely a theme that is discussed, and it's certainly Freudian in its nature. But I don't think Mel Brooks thought it was the mother.
No, he was way more interested in the panic-inducing, disorientation that Jimmy Stewart would experience high up in the air.
Right.
And, it's exaggerated I don't think it's the funniest thing in the movie. It's exaggerated for slight comedic effect. Mm-hmm. But I think that, it was, if anything, it was a really important element to filmmaking, like showing the it's called the dolly shot, right?
Yeah, dolly zoom. Mm-hmm.
The dolly zoom, thank you. And so I think that as a filmmaker, he was more drawn to that.
Yeah.
I think that a neo-Freudian might have been drawn to other things, but I think that that fear of heights, he wanted high anxiety to become like part of the lexicon where people would say like, oh yeah, Alex has high anxiety.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's okay that it never got there. I think he claims it was on the cover of One Time magazine or something. But
I think it would have clashed with how people refer to being on drugs, right?
oh,
I've got
yeah.
anxiety. You've got anxiety about being high? What? I don't get it.
You can refer back to the Reefer Madness episode.
Exactly, right. Exactly. But what I love about the whole thing, as it's exaggerated, of course, what I love about the whole thing is that one of the weirdest scenes in Vertigo is Scotty's dream, which has flashing colors and lights, and Jimmy Stewart's face is separated from his head, and it's just a very weird cut and sequence. And they parody it so well in not only on the poster for High Anxiety, but during the film itself. It's just a spiral graphic and Mel Brooks in sort of like a flailed star pattern spinning, falling on top of it.
It reminds me when I was a kid, we went to Universal Studios and my dad was pulled up on stage for like one of those stunt and effect shows.
Uh-huh.
And so they had him like pushed back and he was in a chair and pretending to fall. It doesn't look like a real person falling.
No.
But it's just a person flailing over a spiral.
Exactly. Flailing over a spiral. And it is used a few times in the movie. And the psychology of this aspect of the homage is that he's got this high anxiety. So he's acrophobic and people keep putting him into situations where
like Mr. MacGuffin?
Yeah, Mr. MacGuffin. Like even at the beginning of the movie when they're like, here, take a look over the side of your balcony over the cliffside, right? So that's Mr. MacGuffin.
Oh my gosh. I didn't catch that as a younger viewer, but like Hitchcock was a huge fan of using the MacGuffin.
Uh-huh.
And
it's a great film technique, I suppose.
A refresher, it's like a plot device that doesn't really have to be important. Not all filmmakers think that this is a good use of a plot device, but
sure.
he did.
It's fine. It works.
So it's like, were the 39 stairs really important? No, but they were what moved the plot forward. Was there anything of consequence in the briefcase in Pulp Fiction? We never know. But,
nope.
It's like, that's the MacGuffin.
Yep.
So when Mr. MacGuffin changed your room from the 2nd to the 17th floor, I had to pause it and just enjoy that for a second.
And it's funny too because as I said in the intro, there is I think the funniest thing to make of all of this from a filmmaking standpoint, when you are paying homage and just celebrating the master of suspense and the fact that he creates a really good mystery throughout many of his films. There is no mystery in High Anxiety. It is all laid out for the viewer. We get a sense of mystery at the very beginning because Brophy's like, I think there's foul play. But then that's paid off almost immediately when we find out Diesel and Montague are in cahoots were the reason why Dr. Ashley died. And we're in cahoots to like do this because they have a weird affair fantasy kink going on.
We might come back to that later because I think about like the psychological experience of like what a person goes through in a suspense film.
Okay.
Right? And so I think that maybe we can talk about it now. So, everyone called Hitchcock the master of suspense.
Yeah.
And he uses this famous example of people having a mundane conversation about baseball. And then they talk for baseball about 5 minutes and then a bomb underneath the table blows up. And he says, what does the audience get in that situation? Well, 10 seconds of like terror and delight and surprise, but 4 minutes, 50 seconds of a rather droll conversation. But if you know at the beginning of that conversation that there is a bomb under the table,
right? That
now, when is this thing going to go off? Everything they're saying about baseball is stressing you out. You're like, I don't even stop talking about baseball. There's a bomb under the table.
Right.
And so here it's like, Dr. Thorndike, can't you see that these people are bad? And it's you know well before he knows.
Yep.
So it's not a mystery, but it's still raises your anxiety.
Yeah, it is still suspenseful. I'll give you that, but it is, I mean, with an actual mystery, we don't know who or what is leading to these suspenseful moments, I'll say. Right? That's a subtle, I would say that's a subtle difference that they're playing on there. Like, we are clearly aware that these are the bad actors, that this is their motivation, and this is what they're attempting.
Okay, but like in North by Northwest, which I think this film is most similar to outside of acrophobia.
Outside of Vertigo, yeah.
Yeah, outside of that component of Vertigo, that, who is in for Cary Grant's character at the very beginning of that. There's no ambiguity there either. You just know they're bad actors. You don't know why. Like, why they want to stop the secret agent is a bit of a MacGuffin in that film. But, it's, again, the tension is like, how's he going to get out of this?
Yes.
And I think that that's the tension that Mel was tapping into.
Right.
With, like, how is he going to not only save these innocent people at the Institute? How's he going to get away? How is he going to, save the day?
Yes. How is he going to clear his name? Before we jump back to North by Northwest, because you bring up a good point, I just want to finish up on Vertigo and talk about San Francisco. So San Francisco was chosen specifically as the location for this APA conference, American Psychiatric Association. San Francisco, as I have mentioned in the previous episode on Vertigo and have seen in other places online, San Francisco acts as a character in this film, just like it does in Vertigo. And there's a lovely connection. Maybe this is our segue into North by Northwest, because he's at Golden Gate Park and he tells the person on the phone, meet me at the North by Northwest corner.
And so it's a pretty obvious one. It's not the most subtle reference in the film, but, he definitely chose San Francisco for a reason. Hitch was thrilled that he went back to San Francisco. Evidently, that was like why he liked filming there, was because he liked the restaurant there, which is very on brand for Hitchcock.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely. And if you can use the setting as a character, as a cognitive person, I'm curious about what you felt about Mel's choice to use the camera and the camera operators as characters.
I love these fourth wall breaks because you sort of expect them in a Mel Brooks parody spoof. And I think they do it expertly. It's always the case of the camera doing a pull-out zoom or a Titan zoom, right?
Well, those were two of the 3 times he did it, right?
Yeah, he does it 3 times.
The time he breaks the window, the time they break through the wall, but also the time it's stuck under the coffee table.
And there it constantly has to move because they keep putting Diesel and Montague keep putting like the various teas and other kinds of dishes for their tea time on top of the glass table, and it's just like, what are you doing? And this is because Hitchcock used cameras in this way. He was of course, his cinematographers are probably the originators of the dolly zoom. There's not a lot of concrete evidence, but
of it, right?
What?
So, or at least they're the ones that popularized it.
Either originators or popularizers, of course. And so he's always been someone who tries to use the camera in really amazing ways. And I think he took some of this filmmaking technique from Orson Welles and the amazing one-er shot in the flashback scene in Citizen Kane, where the camera goes through the house from the window all the way back as it's following these characters talking about young little boy Kane, and moving back, and stagehands and production grips are moving furniture into place in real time. That in one of the last bits of the shot, as they're moving through as the camera's moving backward through the house, you can still see some is candlestick, maybe something on top of a table wiggles because the table had just moved into frame.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. It's been too long. I've got to rewatch that one because I watched it when I was probably like 17. So
you definitely get a much different
I know
take.
Well, that's like any good book or film.
Yeah.
You look at it with new, fresh eyes. It also kind of reminds me, like, Hitchcock might have, you could say, used Jimmy Stewart's camera as a character in Rear Window and all kinds of things. So I think that it was a really nice tribute. But on to North by Northwest, as you were saying.
So North by Northwest has not been on the program yet, but is my favorite Hitchcock film. I don't know if it's the Cary Grant of it all, the immortal plane scene that has been parodied and copied in so many different ways.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically like Raiders of the Lost Ark level familiarity that people, the boulder chasing Indiana Jones, the plane chasing Cary Grant. I think that it's the most famous scene in the movie. And I have been rewatching. I didn't get a chance to finish rewatching it before this episode, but it was fun to see all of those parallels for sure. Like, Cary Grant is dressed up as like a porter from the train carrying luggage.
Yeah.
But then Mel and Madeline Kahn dress as the obnoxiously loud old couple.
Right. The funny thing about that is that they they get through the metal detector with the gun, and they say, "You did a great job. You were wonderful," right next to these cops, right?
Oh yeah, the cops just so wanted to get this annoying old bickering couple away from them. And in the film, Mel claims like, "Trust me, if you are loud and annoying, you are psychologically invisible." And I was like, "Okay, Mel, slow down." But it's like people are going to remember you and talk about you later. But they were no longer looking at his face, which is what he cared about.
Right.
Right. And so he did activate that inattention blindness of sometimes a person will look back in an era where you have like security footage and they'll say, "How could you not see that? It was right in front of you."
Right.
But we have plenty of evidence that says when people are attending to something they deem more important or more relevant, that they're going to miss something that is very, very obvious right in their purview.
Exactly. And this fits with the North by Northwest mistaken identity. Even though Braces, the killer of this movie, wears an amazing mask of Thorndike himself, Mel Brooks obviously playing this part.
This doubling.
In probably one of the best sight gags I have seen in any kind of parody or spoof movie, where Brophy has to enlarge the photograph so much so.
You would need a dark room the size of a swimming pool.
Exactly. Like, how are you putting this together? But all of that is yada yada'd over, and he's got this giant photograph so he can figure out that the person in the elevator is actually Thorndike and not the one who shoots the person in the hotel lobby. And he's immediately found out by Diesel and Montague. Like, they immediately are like,
they're like, "Well, we saw you check into the pool-sized dark room. We're suspicious of what you're up to."
It's very good. But they do figure it out. They have the evidence. It wasn't specifically Thorndike that committed the murder, and so he's able to clear his name at the end. And the last bit of Vertigo is that the climax of the film happens in a clock tower, but during the clock tower, just like in Vertigo for Scotty Ferguson, he overcomes his high anxiety because he figures out that he was repressing his trauma as a very young child, and he overcomes it and he makes it to the top to save the day and everything, and Montague turns into a sniveling little creep at the end because Diesel jumps out of the clock tower and just happens to be the Wicked Witch of the West.
Yeah.
And so he's like, "Ooh, I never liked her."
Harvey Korman is so wonderful.
He's so wonderful. I wish we had him longer.
Oh, yeah. It's funny, though, because before she looked like the Wicked Witch of the West, obviously she looks a lot like Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
I think now I saw, as I was like coming up with my notes on this while I was watching the movie, I saw some differing opinions.
Okay.
So a lot of people were saying Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which makes a lot of sense with the way that she looked and the way that she acted, to me at least. But then there was then I saw other people saying that she was an homage to a nurse in a Hitchcock movie, which obviously makes sense as well.
Well, we haven't seen all of them. He's got so many films, so that's entirely plausible.
Yeah. I would say, even though it doesn't fit with my read on the character or other folks' read on the character, because this was a Hitchcock homage film and not necessarily a Cuckoo's Nest film, right? That was prestige drama, high drama. There's Jack Nicholson won the Oscar for it and everything. So it would be weird, but it did come out in 1974.
Sure. What I will say to that effect is that in Mel's book, All About Me, he at first was like a little taken aback by her costume, but then realized she was going for the Nurse Ratched thing. So in his book, he does compare her character to Nurse Ratched. And he also he's like, are you aware you have a little hair on your lip? And she's like, yes, I put it there. So it's maybe she was doing
I
characters
put
at
it
once.
There. I loved Cloris Leachman's decision.
Oh man, she's an Oscar winner in her own right. That she has done multiple Mel Brooks films, but she is
and she's a different person in every single one.
Oh yeah,
she goes full into these roles, into these roles.
History of the World Part 1 and Young Frankenstein, and this one she disappears into those roles.
Yes, and she turns into the Wicked Witch of the West at the end. The first time I saw it, I was like, wait, what? Where did that come from?
Yeah.
So this last segment that I want to talk about is more or less the second part of the title, the anxiety of it all.
Okay.
And sort of do a meta discussion here, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
I think this is where the richest discussion of the film would actually lay.
Anxiety is something that a lot of people say they have, and I would say fewer people actually struggle with on a daily basis. And I am one of those people. And one of the things that has helped me throughout my life is watching and consuming media absolutely like this. I would say as a young boy, so not yet an adult, Mel Brooks was one of the filmmakers that I knew of, right? You don't necessarily think kids that are like 8 or 10 are going to know filmmakers, like a director or a writer, and be like, yeah, I want to consume all the things that they do. But I was one of those people, and Mel Brooks was one of those people for me, because I did not see Blazing Saddles. That was not one of them, but I saw...
Oh, man, I saw the cut on cable, and let me just tell you that in the famous cowboys eating beans around the campfire scene...
Yeah.
They didn't even play the fart noises. They just put in horse whinnies.
That's so sad.
It's so sad. And now it's like a punchline in a Minions movie. But back then it was so vulgar that they couldn't even do that.
You can't fart while you're eating beans.
I wouldn't recommend the cable television cut of Blazing Saddles.
But I had watched Spaceballs. I had watched Young Frankenstein. I had watched Dracula. Actually, to be completely honest, I think the order was Spaceballs first, and then Dracula Dead and Loving It, based on that coming out in like the mid 90s, I think it was, Leslie Nielsen. And then I think Young Frankenstein. And then as I became a teenager and had a little bit more freedom in what I watched, that's when Blazing Saddles and some of these other movies came out. And then I saw the rest as I got a little bit older. And I think it took me a while to see Producers. But anyways, moving on from that, humor is my point here, right? Humor as a coping mechanism, as a means to reduce anxiety. There is some research out there that suggests laughter in and of itself reduces cortisol response, as well as the epinephrine fight or flight, like active stress response, as a part of the slow cortisol response. It reduces those things.
Do you know if that's been studied in like non-human primates or anything too? Because you'll see like chimps laugh, and
they do laugh. I'm not sure.
That would be so interesting to look at, because what you're talking about is a true evolutionary adaptation. Is what it feels like. I would say
so, and I'm sure it's out there. I mean, who wouldn't love to write a paper and do a decades long investigation on chimp laughter? Their laughs are pretty good, right? So there's all of this evidence that not only in the health psych literature, but in neuroscience and social psychology, et cetera, that laughter has all of these like really important functions. And for me, it has always been to reduce both physical and cognitive anxiety in me. And I've always loved how Mel Brooks and some of these other spoofers out there, like the Zucker brothers,
Sure, airplane movies and stuff.
yeah, the airplane movies, and they did Hot Shots as well. Like, these are very formative parody movies for me. And it has always been that way. And then newer comedies that are probably not as well received these days as they used to be, but the early Adam Sandler movies, the early the Vince Vaughn, Owen Wilson era of the early 2000s, etc. Right? I've always been drawn to these. And I think of all of them, Mel Brooks has always maintained the strongest ability for me.
Yeah, I think in part, right? So you talk about how laughter can be good to combat anxiety. I think Mel would take it a step further. I think Mel would say laughter and the ability to laugh at the worst parts of life is an incredible defense. Not like a Freudian defense mechanism, but like a really strong way to deal. Like, he was a soldier in World War II. And what was he doing just barely 2 decades out of the war? Lampooning Hitler and the producers.
Yep.
He talks about, people talk about how Blazing Saddles couldn't be made today, and not like it was, but he was also, really making a massive social commentary on how stupid racism was.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how damaging it is to a society. And, that it was, he really had funny things to say about serious topics, that he would not shy away from, ridiculing those that really deserve to be ridiculed: fascists, authoritarians, racists, all these different kinds of things. And so sometimes people only look at the silliness of Mel, but I think he taught me how to find humor in situations that are hard to find humor in.
Absolutely. And this goes back to that whole suspense angle of the Hitchcock movies, right?
Yeah.
The idea that Hitchcock was using when he made his movies is that as the suspense grows, so too does the anxiety about the outcome.
Oh, sure. There's different ways to cut that tension, and one of them is with a joke. And sometimes Hitch would use it in his films. So, like, you really like North by Northwest. It's probably among the sillier of the Hitchcock films.
It is, yes.
I
think that's probably why it's my number one.
They're in the elevator, and Cary Grant's mother turns to the actual killers and says, "You boys really aren't trying to kill my son, are you?" And everyone in the elevator starts laughing except Cary Grant. And
it's very good.
I think Hitch had a pretty dark sense of humor.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that, if you look for them, he definitely does have moments of levity and humor in his films. But yeah, I think, like, if you watch a good stand-up comedian, they will create a tension and then release the tension, and they will create a tension and they will release the tension. And sometimes it's not going to hit the sweet spot for a person with anxiety, right? Sometimes it's going to, well, for example, you look at how modern humor has kind of gotten so cringy, and The Office comes to mind. And some of these other scenes where the whole scene is built around discomfort.
Yes.
And you don't get that release barely at all.
Nope. No, but it stays with you. Yeah.
It stays with, and I think that for some, they're like, "Oh, I don't want to watch this anymore." But depending on a person's tolerance for tension, because humor is so subjective too. What is the funniest part of this movie to you is maybe not the funniest part of this movie to me. I, as an IO psychologist, really am interested in the use of humor in the workplace, because that's a real double-edged sword.
Yeah, that could win you friends, but could also make some enemies.
Like, if you're a boss and you use self-deprecating humor, you need to be an effective boss.
Yeah.
You can't be someone
you can't be a Michael Scott.
I messed up again, and everyone else is like, "Yeah, stop doing that."
Right. Like I said, you can't be a Michael Scott. You actually have to be, like, to be fair, Michael Scott is good at his job selling paper. Like, he's a good salesperson,
right?
But he's not a good boss.
People get promoted into positions because they're good at one skill set and then don't have the skill sets for the job.
Absolutely, right? Into. Yeah, right. So, I mean, I think and I call this like a little meta segment here, because, for the anxiety, for the suspense, every single moment of suspense in this movie is cut with a joke or a sight gag.
Oh, yeah. Like when the amazing maybe the best Psych gag in the whole film is when the man delivers the newspaper.
Yes, the Psycho homage.
Right. And it was like frame for frame, very similar. And then, you mentioned in your Psycho episode how they use chocolate syrup, but they didn't even use red blood. They used like newspaper print. So it would go down the drain, black and white.
Yep.
And it's so serious and it's tension. And Mel just looks not into the camera like a fourth wall break, but he says, that kid gets no tip.
Exactly. And that kid is Barry Levinson, the director.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he just keeps reminding me about that damn newspaper. I'll get the newspaper. Here's your newspaper. And he's saying it with the highest voice possible to mimic the violins of that scene in Psycho. And you think that it is Braces, the killer. Right. And then it's because in Psycho you don't actually know who is doing the stabbing, and so like you said, scene is shot for shot, and then we see that it's the bellhop, and you're like, oh, okay, all right. So I think everything it gets paid off as you go through this movie, and even the sight gags, even the jokes are in service of the plot in some way, and using humor as a meta means to reduce anxiety, because that's in the title of the movie. Thorndike has anxiety about being at various heights, and the fact that he's exonerated from a crime frame. That sounds weird. Being framed for a crime in an elevator that has a glass front to it that looks out onto an open lobby, I think is magical for the entire premise of the movie.
There was another point I wanted to just touch on, which was, what do you think about the representation of the Institute for the very, very nervous?
The Psychoneurotic
Yes.
Institute for the very, very nervous. Yeah, to me, that was obviously turned up to 11. Sure. To reference his friend's son's movie, Spinal Tap. Carl Reiner is who I'm referring to, and Rob Reiner is who then I was referring to. Listener, you're like, his friend's son? Who? What?
His very best friend, who he considered a father figure himself.
Yes, and that person's son.
Of course, they were all very close.
Who just recently died, and we lost, and we were just oh God. Anyways, I thought it was turned up to 11. And maybe this is just me, but of course, 3 years prior, we had Cuckoo's Nest come out, which was a very dark take on institutionalization and the goings-ons at these places. And so it's hard for me to not separate that in time, right?
Yeah, and especially as, the country has just sort of gone through a massive deinstitutionalization as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that they're in both cases kind of presented as things that you don't see much of anymore. This is how it used to be. And so they get a little leeway for exaggerating, right?
It seemed like they weren't really doing much at this institute. They weren't really trying to help people.
No, they weren't, why they were so crooked. I think they were just exploiting people, taking lots of money, that kind of a thing. Don't overthink it. But even at its core, I think that a lot of people might have concerns about when a person's going through psychoanalysis, what's the end game? What does curing someone look like? And Dr. Thorndike asks Dr. Montague, he says, what is the recovery rate here at the Institute?
Dr. Montague.
I do think that, as silly as that is, having a conversation with students that is about what does it mean to you to think that a psychological patient might be cured or recovered? Mm-hmm. What does that look like? And so when you're talking about the effectiveness of a treatment, the effectiveness of a medication, the rates of improving symptoms, are you eliminating the symptoms? Most likely not. But are you giving a person the tools to be able to manage those symptoms? I always feel so bad for the patient that was really ready to go, and then Dr. Montague is hitting him with paper clips and the rubber band in the back of the neck and pretending to be a werewolf. He was ready to go, and then is manipulated into thinking that his phantom pains and delusions are back.
Right.
But it does, I think, it could be used as a discussion starter about what are the goals of therapy? Because a person might say, my uncle went to therapy for 20 years and he still has depression. I'm like, well, that's not surprising.
Yeah.
And so I think that it provides an opportunity for some critical thought without clear-cut answers for students.
I think it could be the reason as to why Thorndike was hired for the Psychoneurotic Institute for the very, 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 very nervous is because he is world-renowned. That's what he won his Nobel Prize in for the use of chemotherapy as a treatment for severe psychosis. So he's all about those results.
True.
Which is why I think he asks that question. He sees an opportunity to turn this place around.
That makes sense. Whereas Montague and Nurse Diesel have no interest in doing that, only keeping their gravy train going.
Exactly.
Willing to kill in the process to do it.
Yes, their gravy train and their ability to just have their kink sessions. Yeah.
Yeah, some students might want to get into that. I wouldn't lead them to it. I would answer questions about it if necessary. I might direct them to my alma mater, Northern Illinois, where Dr. Brad Sagarin has the Science of BDSM lab.
There you go. All right. And on that note, I want to thank Dr. Ed Hansen for joining me to discuss high anxiety. Before we say goodbye, Ed, what is going on in your world? Anything you'd like to plug to the listeners?
I just want the FSU students to know that I'm back.
All right. But you'll try not to be late, right? Because what happens if you're late?
No fruit cup.
No fruit cup. Exactly.
So strict.
So strict. Where can folks find you on the internet?
I'm the normal places at @Hansen_PH Dad.
Love that name, PH Dad. Amazing. It would have been awkward if you had chosen that before you were a dad.
I've always liked dad jokes, but I didn't take it that far, no.
All right. Well, this has been fun, Ed. Thanks again for joining me.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity to talk about my favorite filmmaker and psychology at the same time.
Absolutely. And that's going to do it for this episode. Until the next one, thanks for listening.